Hello, everyone. Welcome. So this is a slightly cut down version of the talk that I did this morning because we have a 30-minute slot, so I'm going to focus on one topic and not the other. But if you can go to the GDC Vault and see the full fat version later, hopefully, if it's on YouTube later on, who knows? So let's get started. This is about finding space for sound. I did a talk with the same title 5 years ago for GDC 2020. That's 5 years ago, right? Finding space for sound, and it was about Division 2, Tom Clancy's Division 2. And the reason why it's called that is we were doing lots of things where we are detecting the space and informing what we do with the audio mix intelligently and other fun stuff. This one, since we managed to ship another game, is Frontiers of Pandora, which is based in the Avatar IP. And I thought, since it's a movie game, why not do a sequel for the talk as well? It's kind of in keeping with that vibe. So, as you heard, that's my name, Robert Bantin. My pronouns are they, them. I am the Snowdrop audio architect. Snowdrop is a game engine inside Ubisoft. We have a couple. There's Anvil. Probably have heard of Anvil, Assassin's Creed. This is the one they use for Division series, Starlink Battle for Atlas, South Park, Rocksmith Plus, Avatar, obviously, X-Defiant, which is coming out soon, Star Wars Outlaws. So, you know, it's up-and-coming game engine. I am an audio programmer by trade. So you asked me a question earlier, am I a sound designer? No. See? Told you. And what I do is, the architect title is really about steering that roadmap. So I don't manage people, I manage the technology. And my background is MPEG codecs originally. I worked at Philips Research back in 1998. MPEG 4 hadn't come out yet. We were working on AAC, that kind of thing. Then I worked in music tech and cinema tech, so I worked on some plugins. Did anyone use BFD back in the day? Drum plugin? Guilty as charged. Yeah. So we're going to talk about Slapback version 4. Why version 4? Because version 3 was the last one we shipped in Division 2, and the last two versions before that were prototypes that never got used, completely scrapped. So, as far as you're concerned, this is the second version. But for me, it's version 4. What does slapback mean? So, this is obviously a scene from Elvis. So the term slapback delay refers to a short, single repeat echo effect, right? And it simulates the immediate echo from a hard wall near a loudspeaker. Imagine you're in a band, in a speakeasy, in a basement somewhere. You have some cab speakers on the ground, a little bit of delay there. Also, the microphone, this PA. And then when they were recording it later on, the musicians felt, it doesn't sound the same because it was missing that weird effect. So they decided to add it artificially. And that's where that Elvis drone comes from, is that single repeat echo applied to his voice. It was popularized in the 1950s, obviously. Later on, we started inventing better ways to mix music and essentially lie to the listener about how big the space is and how it was recorded. And the slapback system in Snowdrop started out doing something kind of similar. So the name stuck. So it isn't really that anymore, but, you know, it's a branding thing. So in the inception, version 3 was built from scratch during development of Division 2. It was enabled a few months into the launch of the game. It was working during the public alpha, but we had some problems with it. We had to turn it off. Turned out memory fragmentation with all those delay lines accumulates over 2 hours, which is a really annoying bug to try and reproduce because it takes 2 hours to find it, right? Luckily, my colleague made it worse, and that's how I figured out what was happening. So what we're doing is we're modeling reflection. So this is an image I stole from a textbook. So you imagine on the right-hand side, you have a source position. That could be like an emitter position or a player position. And then what you do is you work out the phantom image on the other side, what the reflection would do. And then you can play the sound there again, but with an additional delay. That's the propagation delay. So it's the time to the wall and back, but you're actually just playing it all the way out there. And you can flip the phase, and you can apply some kind of EQ to attenuate, absorb some of the material of the wall, and then it sounds like a reflection off that wall. First order reflection, at least. So when we did it in Division 2, this is basically what it was happening. This is a planned view of like an imaginary bit of Washington, D.C. There's a cul-de-sac and an alleyway there. Those are the black lines. It was raycasting out radially from the player position, which is the black dots. The red dots are where it hits the wall. And if it hits the wall, you get a surface normal, which gives you the idea of how the wall has been tilted. And the green ones, it's hit nothing. And we went with 6 because we found a lot of rectangular environments. If you go with like 4, you can get some strange edge cases where it somehow kind of like it spatially resonates with the box because you've got 4. So to avoid right angles in your raycasts helps you avoid those strange edge cases. You could have gone with 5. 5 would be good, 7. It's kind of similar to helicopter blades. If you notice that modern helicopters have a weird number of blades that are not the same on top that it's on the tail rotor. It's a very similar problem. What it does, it places emitters around the player. What do I mean by an emitter? I mean a virtual render context that has a position and an orientation that may or may be used by the sound designer to spatialize that sound. In this case, it is, because it makes sense to do that. And then what we do is we use raycasting to create that phantom, to design the phantom image, that thing that from the textbook drawing, right? And also, we changed our raycast systems. So originally, we were trying to use a piercing raycast where it keeps going through materials, and then what it'll do is spot the materials it cares about at the side. That's the distance. That's actually very expensive. So later on, I got the physics team to give me my own physics world. So this diagram is showing you on the left-hand side, that's basically the render view of the level somewhere in Washington, D.C. Maybe you've been there, spawning, dying many times maybe. On the right-hand side, that's what the audio raycast system sees. Now, if you notice, as well as only having to do one raycast, because now you only see materials you care about, it's a lot simpler geometry. Someone asked me this morning, how does that happen? Well, technical artists, they go in and they simplify it because they start off with a collision mesh, which is the same as the render mesh. Turns out it's too expensive, and they simplify it. So if you look, do you see there, this gantry here, this fallen down gantry, suddenly just becomes a big box. That's how it happens. And that's very good for us because it makes things a little bit less erratic. It stabilizes things. It all seems to shut down when you're indoors. In Snowdrop, you know when you're indoors or outdoors because you're inside room data, you're indoors. And when we were indoors, the reflections were too close and we get a very kind of flamming effect. And we also had this other procedural reverb system kicking in for the indoor stuff. So what we did was we basically do the acoustics a different way. That's how it was working. And then what we do is that we would have the way that we reroute the sound in order to repropagate it was using a fake device driver. So normally in Wwise, you know when you set up your exit destination, you might have several, like maybe one for the speaker on a PS4, PS5 controller. We had one for this, and Wwise doesn't know, but it's not really a device. It's fake. And then the audio is then fed back into active elements when they activate, and those are those emitter positions you make for the phantom images, right? And then they're turned on and off by a play or stop event, which has a play action or a stop action, and that's it. And the transit delay, the thing you work out, the full transit distance between the phantom image back to your source position, that's computed as a distance, which you can work out as a delay. And then we had a bespoke delay effect because we wanted to have a delay effect that can change the time when it's playing, which you can't do with the standard delay effect in Wwise. That's like a fixed delay. This one, you can change the delay time and it just reacts. So here's a demo of that working in Tom Clancy Division 2. Early reflections, gunshots. Reload. Now, unfortunately, that's a stereo fold down, so you don't get the full effect. Imagine how great that would be if it was an Atmos, which it is in the game, right? Headphones. We'll make do. So with Slapback version 4, what's changed? So it's a more versatile system. It tackles landscapes and natural phenomena because in the Tom Clancy world, you're always in some kind of city, so it's lots of flat surfaces, so easy peasy. But when you're in Pandora, you have crazy mountains, crazy rock bridges, trees, gorges, annoying topology, so it has to deal with that and not be erratic. It works in two functional layers with distinct behavioral differences. I'll explain why. And allows for both early and late reflection effects. I say late reflection effect, it's a pseudo late reflection. I'll explain how that works. And it implements material IDs from those raycast hits to inform filtering, which is applied to the delay lines. That's how we get there. Okay, we just hit something, it's concrete, so therefore the frequency response is like this. Or if you hit mud, it's more like that. Or if you hit carpet, maybe it's like that, and so on. Here is a demo where the system is off, and I'm just shooting randomly in the forest. I turn it on, and then you hear the late reflection effect, and then we're going to go in and out of a building shooting randomly, and then you'll hear it with the bubble space connected to the weapons tails. And you'll also hear the fact that the late reflections are quieter when you're inside the room than you're outside because of obstruction. And then there's a little bit of video at the end where we're doing something similar, but I also blow up a barrel, and that also ends up being in the mix. And I'll explain how that works too. All right, so how'd you do it? What you need, number one, you need a raycast and emitter manager that places reflection points based on designer set rules. Don't forget the designer is king here. An audio signal router for capturing source sounds and playing them back through those multiple emitter destinations with the added delay and filtering, right? You want some kind of DSP to basically handle the delay time and change the filter EQ as you move around the world. And for late reflection effects, the emitter destinations need to be routed to the environmentally defined reverb with no pre-delay. So what you're doing is you're essentially applying reverb and then you're adding a pre-delay based on that propagation distance, okay? Along with filtering and everything else. So I stole this from Audiokinetics, the documentation. Did you draw that? Is that yours? Okay. You claim, okay, Guillaume made this.
No, I
just to explain, this is sound pressure level, so it's not the linear audio output. If you imagine you made like a spike of sound, like a gunshot, or a pistol, starter pistol, that would be the red line. The green lines would be the early reflections. And the blue stuff at the end is when they start manifesting more and more, and they start getting close together, and they become this sort of diffuse effect, okay? So let's define early reflections. Immediate echoes, echo of echoes, and so on, right? They have distinct phase, and they can interfere with each other, both constructively and destructively. So that means things can get very erratic, very chaotic. And collectively, they have a quite irregular attenuation of distance because of the interference. I define this as part of the direct field. The reason being is that if you try to calculate the direct field without them, the distance is too close to the source. When you start realizing that the early reflections, particularly the first order ones, if you consider them to be their own sound sources, then you realize you have to be further back before reverberation starts to get diffuse. So I place them in part of this direct field concept, right? So imagine I'm the source, maybe the direct field is here, and there's a critical distance, and the reverberant field is over by that motion capture station over there. Late reflections. So the blue stuff, this is nth order echoes. This is where it's got so complex that it's all mashed together. Diffuse, and they're largely phase invariant. At this point, you can mix them together. They don't cancel out anymore. They just kind of stack. they have predictable loudness attenuation over distance. So that's the stuff that's easy to control. You make an attenuation curve, and okay, it starts to start making sense again. They obey inverse square law, if you know that, if you ever did that in school. And so I call that part of the reverberant field. So you now have two fields working with: direct field, reverberant field, and there's a critical distance, and that's constantly changing depending on where you are in your going world. Okay. So, and there's one other thing: the reverberation time. So this is defined. They call it T60. You may. So I forgive. Sorry, if you already know this, I apologize, but I've just, for the sake of brevity. So it's defined as the time it takes reverberant SPL, sound pressure level, from an impulse to fall by 60 decibels. Right. So they're essentially from the red spike down to how quiet it is somewhere along the blue stuff later on. So here's the thing: you would think the reverberation time is very tightly linked to the size of the environmental, the reverb space that you're in. But do you realize things like a tile bathroom in your hotel probably has the same T60 as a Gothic church, which is much larger. So how are they even related? Why do they have the same T60? So since the church is much larger, what's happening? It turns out your brain estimates the scale of reverberant space based on the early reflections. You learn this as a baby growing up. As you go around the world, the early reflections is what your brain is using to work out, I'm in a small space or a medium or large space. That's different between the church and the bathroom. So delay times in the direct field are critical for immersion. That's one thing. The other thing is that for late reflections, they're essentially colored noise, and that's where it really indicates to you what the materials of all the surfaces are made from. That's how you know you're in a marble-built concourse in a train station versus a wooden hut in the Swedish woods, say, or something like that. As I said, like stone or concrete versus wood or carpet is good examples, right? This carpet floor, different to the walls above us. So if we get onto raycast and emitter management, that was one of the points. We now have two raycast layers working independently. The raycasts have a minimum distance radius. So rather than raycasting straight from the player position, you can have a minimum radius somewhere, and they raycast out from that point, so that you don't raycast too close to your position. And I call this concept the ring of local origins because I like naming things. Right? Sounds like Lord of the Rings, or I don't know, something. Anyway, there's a picture coming. Reflection points are rendered via emitters. Remember, there's those virtual render contexts with the position in them. And the layers have different emitter cannibalization. So what I didn't explain before is that rather than just creating emitters constantly, we have two pools, one for early and one for late reflections. And what's happening is as you're creating new positions to create these reflections, you're taking one off the pool and you're taking it from somewhere else. So how is that cannibalizing? It's different. So early reflection layers opt around against responsiveness of oncoming geometry. So as you run through a complex space, in and out of a corridor, into a large room, they're constantly updating because that's important. The late ones are optimized around long tail fidelity. The reason being they have a reverb tail in them. If you cut them off and move to a new position, you would hear that. That would sound weird. So they actually fade, and the new one starts over the top of the old one as it fades. So quite different. One, they're moving constantly. The other one, a new one starts, the old one's still playing, but then it fades out. And that can be controlled by the designer. 2 seconds, something like that. Just so it sounds natural. And this is how you tackle the difference between that direct field and the reverberant field. See, there was a point to me telling you that, right? So let's look at it in terms of like a player-centric position. I used some clip art from Division 2 because we didn't have any clip art for Avatar. Just imagine it's blue. It's a blue person there, right? So mathematically, we still only perform first-order reflections. What does that look like? So imagine we raycast in the azimuth plane, the horizontal plane, radially around the player position. We can do it with a certain amount of elevation, for example. And then if we hit a surface like this wall over here, because of the maths we do to work out the phantom image, we might end up with 3 positions that give us the same point. There's no reason to have all 3 points in the same position. That would sound horrible. So you get rid of 2. You kill them off. You just know, well, if this is the same position or close, get rid of the other 2. But hopefully that describes, because you don't know where that wall is, it's the fact that raycasts are going out like feelers, they're then working out mathematically via prediction where the actual phantom image point should be. And then if you want to correct for that elevation, you want to start, if your player position, you've elevated it like a meter above your head, you can then adjust again if you want to. So then you actually get like a realistic position based on the player position's head, but you might have avoided some annoying geometry in between. I don't know, a fence or a wall or some cover, something like that. And then we raycast upwards for early reflections, early reflection layers, so we can get bits of the ceiling. But for the late reflections, we raycast downwards. Why would we do that? Well, what if you're flying on the back of a giant winged lizard? You are not going to hit anything when you're on the ground. It's going to be too close, and that ring of local origins will take care of that. You'll hit nothing. But when you're in the air, you might want to hear the late reflection coming off the ground whilst you're randomly firing a assault rifle in the air, if you like to do that kind of thing. So let's explain how the maths works. Imagine this is a source position, and that's the reflective surface. So that's like a cross-section of wall or rock or something. We raycast out. We can do it via full 3D position, in which case it looks like this. So to explain, the green line is the raycast. That's the blue. The red dot is the raycast hit. So that vector from the source to the raycast position, we call that vector PQ. We have a surface normal from that hit. We extrude that position based on the length of this vector, and then from there we can subtract that, and we end up from the source position subtracting the yellow vector, and we get this phantom position over here. It's like the reflected distance scale is 2 times the dot product of the direction vector P to Q. The reflection vector then has a surface normal, is then multiplied by the reflected distance scale, and then you can add that reflection vector to the source position and get the blue dot. And that's actually, so from your source position, that is your phantom position. And if you look at it, it does look right, doesn't it? Even though the original raycast went down here. The normal helps you correct for that. And the 2 times is because it has to go to the wall and then to the other side. You can lock it to the horizontal plane if you want to. Sometimes it can be a bit chaotic, so it's locking things in the horizontal plane can be kind of useful. Interestingly enough, designers also ask for another mode called distance only, where we ignore the normal and we just double the distance. Why would you do that? Surely that's less accurate. Well, it's also less erratic. So depending on the layer, you can decide what kind of mode it is. And I think at the end on Avatar for the late reflections based off of terrain, they went with that. So here we go. This is the ring of local origins. So what we're doing is we're creating an imaginary circle around the player position, and then we're creating every single raycast its own origin. Raycast out from there, so we miss stuff inside the circle. We don't hit anything. And then when you work out that phantom image, what you do is you then imagine it came from the root origin. It's part of your calculation. So as an example, that raycast hit for that big bit of rock wall, if we hadn't have done that, it would have hit this bit of wall here, which we don't want to happen. That's how we avoid that without any extra calculations. Doing the calculation from this local origin is the same as doing it from the center. Just avoid extra geometry that you don't want to hit. We record those hits and we compute the reflection points as if the raycast came from the root origin. So if we did like the full 3D one, it would end up here. As you can see, it looks correct. And of course, if we do distance only, it looks like that. So let's talk about the early reflection layer. So that's the green stuff here, this first order, second order reflections. As old reflection points invalidate, emitters move immediately to the new position. So even though they're still playing, even though there's audio still playing in them, move them to the new position. Reflection DSP will actually play as uninterrupted. And so all of the values of the delay time and whatever the EQ settings to be also change instantly, okay? So as an example, if we were to go into this kind of like, this is a plan view, like imagine you're in a kind of gully with some artificial walls. If it was the early reflection layer, perhaps we'd have 2 raycast hits creating that blue phantom image. Then the player moves forward. It finds a new position, realizes it's close enough to the old position to just move that phantom image. So the emitter keeps playing without any fades. It just has maybe a new material data, right? We move again. Now it's over here. Funnily enough, that isn't correct anymore because the wall isn't there anymore. We're just guessing that it is. You can actually do a sanity check if you want to. You can recast out to that position you got as a candidate, and if it's not the same value, you can throw it away and go, oh, it doesn't seem right. Most of the time, though, actually, it's kind of cool to keep reflection going. If we move a bit further forward, now we have a new reflection point that's so far away from the other one, it's not worth making it move. So the old one then fades out kind of quickly, like 200 milliseconds. and the new one starts over there at the top, the blue line, okay? Late reflection stuff. So what we're doing here is we're now shifting all of that reverb effect with this pre-delay based on these further raycasts, okay? As old reflection points invalidate, they fade out and new ones start on the top in the new positions. And this allows for long reverb tails to play out. So this is what I mean by if you have a reverb that lasts like half a second like that, it gives it a chance to fade out without being cut. And the new one starts in the new position. And then this is really important. So this is where ring of local origins is super important, because you really want to start hitting things far away. So you don't want to hit, if this was a video game, we wouldn't want to hit any of these walls. I want to start hitting the walls over in that distance there, right? With the ring of local origins, we can miss all of this local geometry and just get the reflections over at that exit door over there, for example. Okay? This is what it's doing. It's preventing hitting valid materials too soon. It's much more efficient than using piercing raycast. Hopefully that's obvious by now. And then you add the reverb engine to the late reflection delay lines to simulate the diffuse echoes of that reverberant field. So we always have an environmental reverb running, and what's happening is it's getting an additional delay to that reverb, okay? And it's being positioned because it's been spatialized, and it has a position, and it has attenuation to distance and material filtering. So let's go, how would that look like? So we go back to that same gully. Now we have a wider ring, okay? Now it's not hitting those walls anymore. It's only hitting the rock, okay? We have 3 positions, and then we move forwards, and the old positions invalidate, and they fade, and the new ones start. So for a very brief moment of time, we actually have 6 positions playing at once. Move again, the last ones that were new are now fading out, and there's new ones playing again, okay? And then that's how you keep moving around the world. So you have to budget that with the number of emitters you have in your pool. You always need to have at least 2, because you're assuming one is playing whilst the other one's fading out. Okay, and interestingly enough, when I was looking at absorption spectrum of different plants and flora and fauna, I had a look at Pacific Northwest, and I got some real data from the NAS journal. And in case anyone's wondering, baby tears is a plant. It's not really baby tears. Don't panic. So this is an absorption spectrum of these different materials. So I used that. Okay, we have a biome in Avatar that's called the Clouded Forest. It's supposed to be kind of like Pacific Northwest or maybe Nordic. So I use this information. So all you do to make this an EQ is flip it upside down. So it's like everything, you get all the bass through, and then as you go further out, it attenuates higher frequencies. So each valid reflection point has material ID, which you get from the raycast hit, and that's when you decide, if it's a material I care about, what settings do I use? Materials are mapped to filter parameters. We have raw filter parameters built into that delay effect, which I'll show in a minute. And that's what's passed on to the DSP effect via real-time parameter controls. And they're per emitter, right? So they can be completely independent. And just to give you an idea, this is actually a screenshot from Snowdrop. So this is the settings for felt grass, which is in the windy, horse-ridey bit. It was called the felt internally. I don't know why. That's the grass. And then we have rock, with thick, with thin, typical game descriptions of materials. If you look at the material data here, so of the filters, you can have some parameters. So if it's in, what do you call that, fuchsia, then they're active, and then we don't have to use both filters. We can turn one of them off if it's not necessary, in which case that's why it's 0, because it's disabled. That's also a good CPU saving. If you don't need the filter, don't run it. So we create this list of materials for the target for each layer, and then for each material, we link the material ID used in the game, so that's game-specific data. And then we enable the parametric band or the crossover filter band, because that's what's happening in the delay effect. And these values will be posted to the emitter, to the slapback emitter, as it moves or is reactivated. Any unlisted materials, disable the filters entirely, and it's assumed to be flat frequency response. So if it finds a material that someone's just added in the game, it's kind of common, as a technical designer adds a new material, you then have to remember, oh, I actually need to add some filtering to that. So let's look at the rerouting part. So we have these 2 plugins. One of them is a sync plugin, and that's the fake device I talked about, fake audio device. So typically you'd have it as a share set in Wwise, and you would pick a broadcast channel, 0 to 7, and how many audio channels in that you want to allocate, up to 8. So that can handle at 7.1 or something like that, right? And for you might want to do a different channel for the other layer. So for some reason we went with channel 2. I think channel 1 was used for something we ended up not using in game. Hopefully this is like familiar UI to everyone, right? So it's the Wwise booth. And then what you do is you create an org send for this destination. So then you can start sending things out to those output points. And then when you want to capture sound, you pick something you want to capture, like the assault rifle tails, first person, and then what you do is you start sending to those org sends how much you want early or late reflections, and obviously some decibel value for how much you're going to mix them in. Okay, so that's when the designer is now king. You decide what you want to do with this. It doesn't have to be scientifically accurate, probably not, right? It needs to be entertainment. The receiver side. So this is the source plugin. So this is reading the other side. So after you've written to that destination, the source plugin is reading it back out one buffer later. So what you do is then you have an actor mixer element that has the right channel in it. Can you see in the bottom there, channel 0? So that would have been the late reflections one. Every time you play a play event on that reflection emitter, what it's doing is play actions playing that emitter element, okay? And it's picking out that channel. That's where the sound is coming from. So you can control it. Stop event, start event, right? And additionally, then on that actor mixer element, that's when you apply the delay. That slapback delay that has the delay time and the EQ, okay? And whatever other stuff you want to, add to that. You've got 4 slots, may as well use them, right? So the delay and the filtering DSP. So each reflection point creates a receiver instance. And Wwise is playing the source plugin with a single parameter, the broadcast channel. It's a one-to-many relationship. You can only send to one channel from one point, which is the sync plugin, which is your endpoint, but you can read it in many, many times. So if you have 8 reflection points, no problem. Read it in 8 times. They all have different delay times anyway, and that's how we create the effect. The audio signal from the source plugin still needs delaying and filtering, but hopefully you saw that in the UI. And so what happens is this is like a block diagram of how that delay works. So what's happening is that the audio is constantly being recorded from the input side in a big circular buffer. So it's just going round and round and round and round. And the output sample index is chasing it. And the difference between those two is the actual delay time you get. So that you don't hear a click or a bump when the delay time changes suddenly because you've moved half a meter forward and you're going to cannibalize those delay lines, right? Start new ones. There's a power complementary interpolator. There's a very funny way of saying crossfading in a way that works for noise and sine waves, right? It's much the same as the crossfade you get on a DJ mixer, actually. And then we add the phase control, which is the thing that flips the phase because it's going to be a mirror image. And then we add the filter EQ, and that becomes the output sample. Here's how the filters work. One of them is a quasi-parametric band, okay? If you've ever done any DSP, this is kind of like a block diagram of how it's working. The triangles are multipliers. The blocks with the Z -1, that's a 1 unit sample delay. As you can see, it's a network that has feedback, and it all sums together. So this is what's called a direct form 2 biquadratic filter. They're very powerful because they're very generic. You can change the coefficients, get lots of different filter responses. The drawback is this one's actually quite unstable, so I wouldn't recommend using it for any kind of smooth musical 303 type filtering. Not good for that, but it's cheap and flexible. So if you're changing position to these very staccatic positions, no problem. I set the Q factor to 4 so that I didn't have to keep recalculating it. 4 is probably all right. I don't know. But what it means is the center frequency can change and the gain can change. And so that the blue and the orange curves here on this bode plot are showing the extremes of how that works, okay? All the way down, all the way up, all the way to the bass, all the way to treble, more or less. High mid, maybe, I guess you could argue that. So the other filter that's also in line with this inside the delay effect is called the crossover filter. So I made this. This is kind of funky. The inner core of that is a low-pass filter modeled on the exponential decay of a resistor capacitor, that lump parameter that's called time constant. And what you do is you control the K value to get your different frequency response. The outer part is actually subtracting from it. So if you took one output or the other, you'd have a high pass or a low pass, because if you subtract the low pass from the input, you get a high pass shape, kind of, right? But then what we do is we put a voltage divider at the end, and when it's exactly in the middle, they cancel each other out and everything is phase linear. But when you start changing that, then you start getting bass boost or treble boost, and you can move the center frequency accordingly, all right? So that's when you have each half of that. That's the low pass section, that's the high pass section. Got a bit of a bump there, don't worry about that, you can't hear it. And then if they combine together, 50-50, you get the red line. No phase cancellation. But of course, as you start to dominate one, you can get this, or you can get this, or something else in between. Use your ears. Are you ready for a white noise test? So I'm going to put some white noise through these filters so you can hear the move and you can hear the effect, because obviously that's quite dry description. So if I give you the real, how it really sounds, then I guess maybe you'll trust me. There you go. So those are those filters. So hopefully you can see one of them is a peaking or notching filter, and the other one is a high-low balance with a variable center position. So the combined result, this is the thing that's is really what this is all about. It's about breaking down that original impulse into separate components and then recombining them based on the fact you can then change position, you can change geometry, maybe destruction or affect it in some way. And so the combined result on that gully could look like this. So what I'm saying here is, if you take the circle in the middle as your player position, you would have gotten two early reflections. The nearer one is louder because of attenuation. The distance is less because it's closer. The other one is quieter, so I've made the amplitude smaller. And then you would have gotten four late reflections, and they have their impulses. So the reverb generator would have done its job. But then, because of the different distance, they have a different delay and different filtering. And there's one other thing. We apply obstruction and occlusion testing so that you don't hear these reverbs if it's behind a wall, if you're inside a building, that kind of thing. So I have a video where this is how it really sounds like in the mix, because it's a very chaotic example of it all working together. It's a bit more subtle, but you'll notice when you go inside or outside, you start hearing more or less late reflection, early reflections. When you're inside, the early reflections start to dominate. Okay? Enjoy. There you go. So, in summary then, reflection point cannibalization needs to have different modes for the reasons I explained earlier, late reflections. The raycasting within a ring of local origins is really useful. It doesn't cost you any more to do that. You're just offsetting stuff. And therefore, you can then choose whether you hit something or not, rather than having to attenuate it later in Wwise with a little dip in your attenuation curve at the start. That's actually very expensive to do that. You end up using virtual voices, right? And the filtering of materials, big win, obviously, because then you get lots of variation based on the world. And as people fill out your world, you automatically get that information. You don't have to mark up anything in your game. It just works. And you need robust memory management. I can't stress this enough. If you're going to be messing around with this number of delay lines of 0.5 meg each, constantly cannibalizing them, you need to have some way to make sure that keeps working, not just for 10 minutes, but forever. We had this where it was working for about 2 hours during the public alpha Division 2, and then it would crash. So what we did initially was we had the game kick you out after 2 hours until we figured out what was going on. Eventually, someone made it worse, and I got someone to build me a bot running around the block. And that's how I figured out in the end what was happening. So I made a separate memory manager just for delay lines. Okay? And that's it. Thanks for listening. Hope that was interesting in some ways.